am Jo Kane, and going one-on-one with me today is Leanne Dalzell, MP for Christchurch East. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Jo.
Right, you've had a week to think about the government package, scrutinise and look at the detail. Where are the fish hooks?
Well, there are some fish hooks, but perhaps could I just start by mentioning a letter to the editor that I read this week?
Not the lemon one.
Yes, the lemon one, because it's been very upsetting to a lot of the people that I represent. It said that, you know, for people who had accepted the government offer, congratulations. For those that felt they'd been sold a lemon, go make lemonade. And I think that what that really reflects is a complete misunderstanding about the nature of the offer that's been made. In a disaster situation such as an earthquake, the EQC make a decision as to the suitability of repair to land. In this case, the government has made that decision on the basis of engineering advice for a number of reasons. They're not saying that the land can't be repaired, it's just too costly and there has been too much damage to make it a timely repair. So they've made that decision. We're being told that we have to leave our properties behind. And we're being left in a situation where we haven't got enough value in our land because they've chosen the rateable value, not a market value, for our land to make us an offer, which leaves a lot of people with insufficient money to buy another section to have their rebuild on. And then for those that have got enough equity in their land to buy another property, their insurer's saying, well, actually, your house wasn't that damaged. We'll just pay you the price of repairing it. We won't pay to rebuild it, even though we cannot repair our houses where they currently stand. So these people have, in fact, been left high and dry by the government offer and are feeling pretty dazed and pretty confused, and to have people that don't understand that this is not an offer that preserves equity, which is what the government said that it was going to try and do, I think is pretty unfair. And I would like people just to stay out of that debate right now until all of the cold, hard facts are actually on the table. That's what I'd like to see happen.
It was a cruel blow, and it's one that could happen and reverberate around the country as people say, well, what are the cantabs going on about? You know, this is a fair deal. So those fish hooks that we're talking about, there are a number, aren't they, as you've worked through the meetings. Any other ones that you can think of just that came to mind?
Well, there's another one that nobody seems to have picked up, and that is that if you accept the government offer of the total package, which is the rateable value on your property in 2007, and that probably is the offer that I'll accept. My husband and I will obviously look at the detail when it comes. But if you take that offer and you then move out of your house, you've got no access to temporary accommodation assistance from anyone because your insurance contracts come to an end at that point. You've reached full settlement, and your arrangement with the temporary accommodation service that has been set up by the government doesn't kick in because you've reached a settlement with the government. And I don't think anyone's actually worked out that means somebody who takes the offer on virtually day one, which I don't advise anyone to do. I'm actually advising people to take advice before they make any arrangements with anyone. I think that a lot of people just haven't worked through what that will mean. You could be left spending some of your capital value in your current property on temporary assistance until you find yourself a new home. So, you know, these things have got fish hooks in them, and I would really have liked to have seen the government put a lot more effort into this before they made the announcement. And the second thing that I would have liked them to have done is actually, well, apart from consulting with people about the actual arrangements they were going to enter into, is I think they need to admit to the public that they tried to preserve equity, but they haven't, and that this offer does represent quite a significant blow to a large number of people.
Some of the communication messages or the information that needs to go out has been really difficult to disseminate, and I think that's where some of the problem has happened. You're doing that all the time. You're up to number 65.
No, 16. Only number 16.
Oh, I thought it was number 16. Yeah,
I know which one you were talking about. The local MPs, the Labour MPs, have been putting out a regular bulletin, and yes, we are up to number 65 since the actual February earthquake. But I've been doing my own earthquake information updates for my constituents since the September earthquake, explaining, taking all of the technical detail out of the reports and then breaking it down into plain language and disseminating that. So I think my constituents, and I'll take some credit for this, are particularly well informed about the detail of all of the different things that we've gone through since the first earthquake, because I've made it my business to get to know quite difficult technical stuff and then, as I say, translate it into plain language.
Do you think the government was put under the pressure, and the John Campbell came into town and there was a lot of stories that went on and quite emotional, and this package came out kind of in a gap that seemed between the Prime Minister going. Do you think they went a little bit too early? Because there were some shocks for those that are in Pines Karaki, shocks for those in Spencerville and what have you. Do you think they went too early?
Yeah, I think they made a big mistake. My colleagues and I have been advising the government on how to do this right from the start. We're very well connected with our constituencies. We know these people. We live amongst them. We are them. We very much represent their interests. And what I think has happened on this particular occasion is that the government has decided that it wanted to tie the detailed findings of the land report to the announcement about what they were offering as an alternative to those that were not going to be able to rebuild. My argument has been consistently separate the two issues. Deal with the land first. Tell us about the state of our land. Let us ask and understand all of the technical issues around the land. I'm still, finding things out about why we can't rebuild in Bexley. So
you're thinking that it's not just the earthquake, there now is other problems like flooding?
Yes, absolutely. Flooding's a big issue because the land has fallen. These are all flood management areas that have been particularly affected by the earthquake. So I think that I think it would have been much better if they'd explained what had happened to the land, let us ask questions of the engineers, all of those things, and then sit down and talk to us about the kind of package that would enable us to rebuild our homes and rebuild our lives.
So you're saying they went too early?
They went too early on the package. They should have separated the two issues, told us what was happening with our land, and then talked to us about what we would like to see in a package to support us in our rebuild.
OK, we'll be right back after the break. I think the community expects all of the leaders to be working together, and you have these bipartisan meetings. Are these effective?
Well, I'm going to say they're not as effective as they should be. The government has been very public about the need for bipartisanship, to set aside all political differences and work for the good of the city. Totally agree. That's what we must do. Unfortunately, I haven't seen that coming across to us from the other way, and the reason is that every time that we sit down and try to encourage the government to coordinate, the announcements, to work with us about how we communicate with our constituents, we just seem to be hitting a brick wall. So we basically sat down with the Minister and learned the outline of the package 15 minutes before the media briefing occurred.
Doesn't sound quite the way that when I spoke to the Minister about that, how you should all be working together and what the community expects.
Well, the cross-party forum should be an opportunity for all of the political interests to be able to sit down and talk openly and honestly about what it is that they want to represent in terms of the interests of their constituents.
I mean, you are elected by the people. Do you get a sense that now that we have Roger Sutton, and it's really hard to try and work out where the decision-making actually lies, do you get a sense that he's actually understanding and needs to take on board the messages that are coming from not only the MPs but the people in the community? Oh
yes, and I think I've got great confidence in Roger. I almost feel that he's sort of this beacon of hope at the
isn't everybody?
Yes. And I'm not just saying that from a politician's point of view. Actually, I'm actually saying it from my constituency. I remember walking around the wetlands at Bexley after the announcement was made, and and people were walking up to me and saying how happy they were that Roger had been appointed because they'd seen him perform as the head of Orion, absolutely determined to get power back into the east and to ensure that the lights stayed on over the winter months. So, you know, he really is held in very high regard. He's got a lot of kudos. He's got a lot of political capital that I think that a politician would love to have. And I think that as long as the minister listens to him, then he will be a voice for the people.
But we do have the layers, these decision-making layers, and we have the Christchurch City in the middle of it, and in a government-controlled environment, Canterbury. Do you get a feeling that the community is getting the right messages? Because they're not only going to get them from Sarah, they've also got to get them from the Christchurch City Council. Do you think the City Council is getting out the right messages to the community? Well,
I've been a little disappointed in the Christchurch City Council, as people who've heard me speak before would know. I look jealously across the Waimak River to the Waimakariri District Council, where I see, you know, a sense of engagement with their community, really upfront communications, community meetings that are involving everyone, the local MP, Clayton Cosgrove, and you know, the minister's been involved in meetings out there as well. Really, really connected with their community. And on this side, just an absolute blank wall, you know.
Do you think they seduced the community into that have your say, which was kind of touted as 10,000 people and giving in all these messages which spot the obvious, you know, transport and open spaces? Do you reckon that was a waste of that kind of resources and energy and sort of sidetrack the community?
It's difficult to know. I mean, look, I'm going to look for how they synthesise all of the ideas that came out of that, because they can make it a good process as long as they continue a proper process of engagement. I went to a fantastic event which had nothing to do with the Christchurch City Council the week after the Share Your Idea one, which I also attended. But this one was TEDx, that was organised by local community people. And it was great. We had fantastic video presentations from overseas that weren't necessarily related to Christchurch, but related to community development and to how you might rebuild or think about urban design. And then we had presentations from people locally as well. And look, honestly, it was just the most inspiring day, and I came away feeling really powerfully, well, not powerful, that's not the right word, really positive about the power of communities to make a difference in terms of recovery and rebuilding would be.
But you have to have the people in at the beginning, and if we use the CBD, they seem to have just forgotten about the people that actually own the land there, the people who actually have the connection to it. So do you think that we're using the international best practice in the recovery and the rebuild?
No. I have been kind of battling for some focus on recovery. Recovery is a process. It's been well documented, well researched. We only need to go over to Australia to look at how they manage the bushfire reconstruction, how they have managed the flooding in Queensland. And the community engagement is just absolutely the critical element, and it has been completely absent since the first earthquake. So, you know, this actually dates back to before February 22, and in fact, September 4, if the council had adopted the recovery process that other councils in other parts of the world have adopted after such a disaster as that was, then we wouldn't have been so far behind the 8 ball when February the 22nd hit.
I haven't been able to find where any of those countries have had to go and completely change the legislation for a pocket. Is there anywhere where you have found whether? I mean, I know Labor supported the legislation.
Yeah. I do support the legislation. Yes. And I do support having extraordinary powers.
Do you think it's cutting through, like it's meant to be fast-tracking stuff? Do you think it's cutting through?
No, I don't. And the reason is that I think the first piece of legislation that was passed created a body called the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Commission. It was a complete waste of time. All it did was replace the regional structure around our civil defence and emergency management processes, which are brilliant. The only reason that it fell apart was because this other structure that had no power was put in its place, and then afterwards Sarah's been set up. But unfortunately it's been set up as a government department. I wouldn't do that. I would have set it up as an independent Crown entity with a board. So the chief executive would have been separate from the minister, or separated from the minister, from the political influence, by a board who that chief executive would be accountable to. I think that that would have served Christchurch and the greater Christchurch area, the Waimak and Selwyn, much better than a government department, which is necessarily it only has the capacity to deliver government policy.
Oh, thank you. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. Leanne, you've made a stand not to go on the list. Why?
Well, it was actually a decision that my husband and I came to over Christmas. So I made this decision before the February earthquake. That's because we had to get the nomination in, I think, early January. And I said to Rob, I mean, I've been in politics for a long time, as you know, yes. Sort of 21 years. Yes, 21 years this year in October. And so I thought, well, you know, to be honest with people, and I know there's going to be some debate about MMP, which I totally support. I really support the mixed member proportional system, and I hope that we vote to retain that. But I felt that if I wasn't elected as the MP for Christchurch East, after everything we'd been through up until then, I actually didn't want to be an MP anymore. So I thought that it was not... for me, it didn't have integrity that I would put my name on a list when I would never take a list position again.
There's some risks there for Labour, because you've got Brendan Burns, of course, Christchurch Central, you've got Ruth Dyson in the Port Hills, Clayton and Waimak, and yourself, all struggling to actually really work for your community. How difficult is it going to be for you to actually run an election, start to put those billboards out in your London communities?
I know. I have actually thought about this because, in a way, we won't be running an election campaign in the way that we would normally run an election campaign. But what I think that I certainly will have billboards out. I want people to know that I'm going to be running to be their representative, and I will also be campaigning for the party vote, but I won't be campaigning for the party vote for me to have a fallback on the list.
Yes.
I'm campaigning for the party vote because that's the vote that determine who's the government. And I believe that we need to have some changes in Christchurch, and we're only going to get those changes if Labour becomes the government. So we're going to be campaigning as hard for that as we can under the circumstances. So I always do street corner meetings. Yes. That isn't going to stop. So I'll be doing my traditional campaign. I've even had I had a constituent come up to me just recently, and he's got an old truck that he drives around quite a bit. And he said, I'm getting it measured up for one of your billboards and I want it on there all the time. So he's going to have a mobile billboard for me running through the electorate. So, yeah, and I've had lots of offers of help, and I think that, yeah, people are going to give me a fair hearing regardless.
Do you think we run the risk as a country of being completely distracted? We've got Pike River, we've got this Canterbury earthquake, and we will have the Rugby World Cup. And there doesn't seem to be this focus on any real policy on what National is bringing out at the moment, and the mandate that they are saying to do certain things. There's not, the community just don't seem to be buying into it.
I know, and this is always going to be an issue in an election year that has so much else, you know, on its plate, and Rugby World Cup obviously is going to consume parts of the country in the very near future. I think that I think the messages are just going to have to be kept simple, and the main message that I'm giving is that a vote for National is basically a mandate to sell our country's assets, and I'm not prepared to see people make that decision without having that very clear understanding of why, of what they're doing. So, I think asset sales, the cost of living, jobs and skills, You know, and when I look around Christchurch and I think of all of the opportunities for training our young people and getting them into jobs that are going to stand them in good stead for their future, I say, well, why not have all of those training academies just churning out our young people ready to take on the task of rebuilding Christchurch?
The government puts
makes
money
so
into
much
that.
sense.
And
yeah,
why is it not happening? I mean,
because what happened was that they'd taken so much out before. And the other thing, I mean, I don't know if you
what
remember,
do you mean by that,
they'd taken out all of this money out of the skills budget
yes.
For training our young people into those trades. So all they're doing now is making up for what they've taken out, and in fact they haven't completely made up for what they've taken out. So what we have to do is we have to get a focus on what's good for Christchurch is good for New Zealand, because we don't want to be the city that's blamed for the sale of our assets and our long-term future. And that's owning our futures, sort of a bit of a phrase that has been bandied about around a whole lot of things. But when you sell your assets and they end up in overseas hands, then that's what we're doing. We're not owning our future at all.
A bit of a worry for Christchurch City and even Waimakariri with this reinsurance and thinking about probably the only thing they've got is actually to sell off some of the city's assets. Your feeling on that?
Oh no, I'm really opposed to that, because if you think about it, those assets essentially generate income that have kept our rates down over many, many years. And I don't know if you remember, but Christchurch was always referred to as the People's Republic of Christchurch because it refused to sell its assets. We are in a much better position today because we didn't sell them. So don't sell them off for the short term, otherwise we pay the price in the long term. That's just making another generation pay for the disaster that we've suffered from today. We do need to fund the recovery of Christchurch, but that is not the way.
The structures that are set up, how do you think that we can monitor the performance and the effectiveness of that investment that's now been shown in the plethora of agencies that have been set up, some old, some new?
Well, I think that the main thing will be to ensure that people are not forgotten in the I don't know, in the process of recovery. We have to own our own recovery, and I read an article that was published just this last week, and Bruce Glazovich, I think his name is, he's an expert in disaster recovery. He's based at in Massey University, and he's made the point that it is our recovery, we own it, and so that means we are the ones who have to hold all of those agencies and the government to account.
And just briefly, are you concerned about the lack of affordable housing, rent, land in Christchurch?
I think that there's a real issue about the way that decisions have been made around temporary housing. I mean, you remember those empty caravans. I mean, millions of dollars. Well,
what about the land?
$1.5 million wasted. Why? The land, yes, we do need some affordable land in the market really quickly, and I think that the government and local government have got a role to play in that.
Leanne, thanks very much for coming on. I know you're a really busy MP in the worst affected areas in Christchurch. Thanks for the work you're doing, and I'll be back on 1-on-1 next week.